In this video, I'm going to show you how the question bank works for creating questions for quizzes in Moodle. Now, the question bank is not a necessary element of creating a quiz. You can create a quiz and add questions to it without ever actually touching the question bank itself. However, every time you create a quiz, it automatically creates that as a set of questions that now reside in your question bank. What this means is that chances are, if you've used quizzes before but never actually used the question bank, if you were to now open up your question bank, you would find quite a few categories of quiz questions living in there. I'm going to do that here in this course. So I'm going to come over here to question bank. If you're using a different theme, this might be in a different location, but in this theme, it is here in the course administration blog. When I open it up, I've got 4 options here. 1, questions that currently exist or can be made, categories that they're organized into, and then the ability to import and export quiz questions into other formats. I may have misspoken in a prior video that said that moves them from site to site, but it does not. It has to do with moving them in and out of formats used in different types of learning management systems. Our focus is going to be on this first option, which is questions. And you'll notice that you can get into any of these things from these tabs across the top here. So to begin with, you choose the category of questions, and there's always a default category that is created for the site that you're currently in. And so any quizzes that I may make now that aren't intentionally set into categories for the question bank here, we'll just go into this default. But if I click on the toggle, I'll see that I have other things, and these are simply other areas that I have direct control over, so other course sites that have quizzes inside of them. Now, in reality, this isn't every single course site I've ever had. That would be too large. I've limited this to just those course sites that have the particular account that is set as the instructor for this site. Not that that matters a lot to everyone, but my point is, if you use quizzes a lot, this list of all the possible categories will get pretty big. But I can look at some earlier. Now, what's interesting here, and I want to point out, is that this site here does not actually exist any longer. This is a very old Moodle site. This is 2013, that's 2014. Neither of those exist any longer, but the questions in the question bank were retained. And then this is a more recent set of quiz questions. So I could work my way up because I have access to some other areas, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to work within these. I could also create a new category right now. I'm in the question bank. I don't want something that's just going to say default for this course. I want it to be a very particular category that deals with, say a set of material. In that case, I'll need to come to the Categories tab and actually create that category. I find the interface for the question bank tool to be unwieldy and not particularly intuitive to guide your way around in. These arrows all, I don't know. The up and down ones have to do with changing the order of this in the list. I can throw away the entire group of them, or I can go in and change settings related to them. But here, the more important part here is wanting to create a new category. Now, everything's going to live inside this default, what's called a parent category, a main category, unless I decide that I want to make it default for the entire system, which I can do. You can't, but the whole rest of everyone at Gettysburg College doesn't need access to this quiz category, so I wouldn't do that. I can access these courses even if I'm not in Example Course 2020 later, so I don't really care what my parent category is, but I do care what the actual category name is. So I'm going to change this to Summer Training. And so now, later on, if I'm in another website and I'm wanting to take this quiz into that other website, or a selection of these questions, it's not really a quiz yet, it's a selection of questions, I know what category they live under. I've given it a particular name. I don't really care much about its parent category. I could give it a description to remind myself if you use a lot of question banks, might be a good idea. And then I'm just going to add that category. So now I have another category with nothing inside of it. So I can pop back over to my questions tab, and then I can change this to my new summer training category. And any additional questions I make at this point, there's nothing in it, but any additional questions I make will now live inside of there. Move this back to all of my options. When I actually selected a category there by changing that, I now see every question that lives inside that category rather than just my category options. There's a lot of questions here. You may recall from your own use of the quizzes, or perhaps even your other training you've done in Moodle quizzes, that when you create a question, you always have to give it a name. That question has some sort of a name that students don't see. They're not actually part of the quiz. This is where they come into play. We don't see the full text of this question. We only see the name that it's been given. Now you can tell I don't give things particularly good names. And in fact, I don't know which course site did quiz 2 question 3 come from, for instance, things like that. Here are some other questions that came from someone else, and in this case they used the question text as both the name of the question and the question text. For good or bad, it gives a better sense of what's there. An important aspect then when you create a new question is to either make and you're going to use the question banks, is either make your name of your question descriptive or tag your question, which is an option when you create a question, by tagging your question with some terms that will help. Now, I don't believe none of these have been tagged, so I don't think I can actually search by a tag here, but had I tagged questions with words like weeks chapter 1 or mortality or some conceptual tag or some descriptive tag that would then allow me to do a search for all the questions that would deal with that. If you are using what I refer to as backwards course design or goal first design, an option might be to either tag or name your questions based on the quiz that they live in, but tag your questions based on the goal that they meet. And then that way you can choose questions that meet particular goals, or probably more importantly, the sub-goals of that section of the course. So some combination of what's the resource that this question is taken from, what learning goal does this question meet, perhaps even a tag as to what type of question you see it as. Is this a memorization question? Is this an apply your knowledge question? Is this a synthesis question? Those kind of things. Use tags to your benefit. It may seem like a lot of work because it is, but if you want to use question banks fully as a mechanism for having randomized questions for your students that allow comparable quizzes between students but not identical quizzes between students, these tags will be ultimately very helpful for you. I am going to not necessarily spend a lot of time on creating new questions because that is another video, but just know that when I come here to create a new question, I get the exact same interface, and everything from here on out works exactly the same as when you're creating questions inside of a quiz. In addition to this, you don't create a quiz here inside the question bank. You look at questions. You can go ahead and retag them now if you want to. You can change them. You can duplicate them. Duplicating quiz questions can get a little tricky when you're actually inside of a quiz because of students, particularly if students have already taken that quiz. But duplicating quiz questions inside of the question bank is not an issue because there is no affiliated data to that question. There's no responses that have ever taken place. And of course, I can delete them here too. So that as a whole is how you set up question banks. How you use them inside of quizzes works a little bit differently. So you have to first have a quiz. So I'm going to back out of this question bank now. I no longer need to be in it. I have lots of questions. Let's say I've made everything, and I'm going to create a new quiz. Actually, I'm going to use this quiz that already exists here, and I'm going to add questions to it. No questions have been added to this quiz yet, which means I need to edit the quiz. I can click here, and in a different theme, there'll be for instance, if you're in the Snap theme, it will be located in a different place. All right, so I'm just going to click Edit Quiz. Now this time, rather than going Add a new question, I choose Add from a question bank. And then now I choose my category. What category do I want to choose? Do I want to choose the default for that? Do I want to choose one of these others? Now here, again, it's not giving me a list of all the questions that are in the parent category. It's giving me questions that exist in these subcategories. So that's why this whole parent category, subcategory thing is not as big of a deal when you're inside the question bank as you might think. It's just a way to help keep everything clumped together if you choose to. So I'm going to choose this one right here. And I've got lots of questions here, lots and lots of quiz questions here. This is every quiz question from reading quizzes in spring 2013. I don't have them tagged. That's okay. So I'm going to add from the question bank. And I could choose all of them. I could choose some selection of them. I'm going to pick this one right here. Just that one question, and then I'm going to add selected questions to the quiz. There we go. So now that's a set question. Everybody will have that question. But I can also choose to do random questions. These again come from the question bank. So I'm going to go back to the question bank, and I'm going to say, do I want to include questions that are from the subcategories here? So in this case, it starts to get more important. I could choose that, and then it's going to choose everything. Or if I pick that, there's no subcategories there, so it doesn't care. But down here, this one had subcategories, so that's why that appears. If I tagged things, I could make it so that it's only randomly pulling from ones with certain tags. I don't need to create a new category and a new set of questions in my question bank in order to only pull if I've used the tags. And let's say now I want the remaining 9 questions in this 10-question quiz to come randomly from any of these questions that live here. So add random question, and bingo, there they all are. Now it has, in a sense, renamed them. It's not truly renaming the questions, but here in my visible quiz, I don't see the original names of the quizzes. I just see that it has pulled a random one, because that is ultimately how it's going to work. It's going to be completely random. So as you can see, you can mix adding questions from the question bank, a specifically chosen question, with random questions, and then I could come back in now and just add a new question altogether. So your quiz does not have to be all random questions. It can be some random questions and some other chosen questions. I could now choose to even go a step further and shuffle the order of these questions. So now if I started out with 87 questions and I'm picking 9 of those randomly, and I have 20 students in my class, and I'm shuffling the order, this will create a scenario in which it is unlikely that any 2 students would have both the same questions and the same order of those questions along the way. In my particular circumstances, I wouldn't choose random questions just to try to prevent violations of academic integrity, because that would not be my concern. These are reading questions that I'm letting them take multiple times, things like that. But I'm doing it so that when they go to take quizzes multiple times, they get different sets of questions each time. So it works very well as a study tool under these circumstances, or in some way, a way to re-emphasize the information that they may have gotten out of their readings. I can change the point values. Keep in mind that if you change the point values here and you want the total point values here to match here, you will need to change it. Now, something I'm a little bit uncertain with, I believe, I'm like, why isn't there a point value here? It's because the question I brought over is not actually a question. It's a descriptive piece of information, which, would make total sense. We'll say, great. That's the descriptive piece of information. It's not an actual question, and so on. If I want these marks to add up, I need to make my maximum grade match my total of my marks. I do that, I click Save. If I don't care, if this is more like weights, if I have decided that no matter what, this test is being graded out of 10, but this question, I want this question to be worth twice as much as all the others, sort of weighing. I didn't do the right thing there. I'm supposed to hit Enter. It tells me escape to cancel, enter when finished, and I didn't do either of those things. There we go. So now that one's going to be more heavily weighed, and let's make this one more heavily weighed too. There we go. I still out of 10 points, but it's going to end up meaning that this is not worth 2 points. That's not worth 1 point. This is worth, a little less than both because this adds up to 11. So this is going to be worth 0.9, and this will be worth 1.7 or something like that. I'd have to do the math. So that is creating a quiz using the question banks, which are a really powerful way to create quizzes designed to help students drill, quizzes designed to help students test their own learning, quizzes designed to help students practice, and a whole variety of other ways to use quizzes as a formative tool. In addition to that, it is a mechanism when you're using the quiz tool for an actual exam to create multiple exams for students without having to literally have 4 or 5 different tests, instead having one test that pulls random questions.